productivity and performance is by and large a function of the quality of air that we breathe within our workplace. And ultimately, it's the health of our employees and the well-being of our employees that ensures that a company functions seamlessly on a day-to-day basis. So it's high time that corporate leaders take notice of the fact that the quality of air has serious repercussions on a business and its bottom line. And the ETRealty Workspace Efficiency Summit is an initiative aimed at bringing together all relevant stakeholders, from corporate policymakers to industry movers and shakers, such as yourselves, on a single platform in an attempt to shed light on this very subject. And it's worth mentioning that this summit has stemmed from a collaborative effort supported by an ecosystem of partners, and I'd simply like to take a moment to acknowledge them. We have our presenting partner, of course, Candor TechSpace, and our clean air partner, Honeywell. But I'd also like to thank all of you in this room, because this forum is intended to be interactive. And the combined wealth of knowledge in this room assures me that we have a very exciting day of conversations ahead of us. So with that, to kick off this summit and set its tone, may I please invite on stage a veteran in workspace design and Senior Vice President of Brookfield Properties. Please join me in welcoming to the dais, Shantanu Chakrabarti. Huge round of applause for him, please.
Thanks, Pooja. Good morning to all of you. I think it's very heartening to see a full house here in the morning on a busy working day, which just kind of goes to show that what we believed is an issue, something which needs to be discussed, debated, and like-minded people need to kind of collaborate upon. We've been. It's a proof of the pudding that that's a very pertinent issue. When ET was kind of conceptualizing this whole forum, if I may say so, we were very excited to be a partner, and what was good also was the fact that we had Honeywell with us at that particular point of time, because we have been working with them closely to address this in our in the various campuses that we are building. And I feel that as developers of urban built environment, it is our responsibility as well to address to the context which is all around us. And one of the biggest contexts today, and especially so for NCR, is pollution, is air pollution, and how it impacts us. It's very visible when we walk outside, especially during the winter months, people wearing masks. It's a pretty hard hitting on our face. But what's something that kind of gets really, shoved under the carpet, if I may really say so, with a bit of pun intended, is the fact that indoor air quality is as critical a parameter for us to control, and this generally gets done in a very rudimentary and a very age-old fashion. As a result, there are research, and we will learn about that during the day. That there is, it impacts, the well-being of people, in turn well-being of the organization at the large, impacts productivity, and so on and so forth. So really the idea was to kind of bring this whole issue to the forefront. I'm thankful to ET that they've been able to gather all the relevant stakeholders today. We have stakeholders from the government, an IS officer who would be telling us about the government intervention into this area. We have captains of the industry, especially in the workplace, workplace sector, telling us what they are doing in their respective organizations. We as developers will also contribute in terms of what we can do and what we intend to do in this. And of course, we have Honeywell, our partners, to also tell us what they can provide as viable solutions. I think I wouldn't take much time because there's an action-packed morning today with a lot to learn, a lot to take away from. But I think more than that, what we can go back and disseminate back to our stakeholders, whether at our home or in our offices, where this issue needs to be highlighted. This issue needs to be, brought to the fore, so that, from a long-term perspective, we create an environment where the generations to come, feel not just comfortable, but their well-being is also taken care of. So I'll thank you all for coming here and participating in this event. And I'm hoping that by the end of this event, you will all be more aware. We'll take back more inputs and kind of be the change in your respective organizations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shantanu, for helping put everything into perspective. And as he just alluded to a few moments ago, I think we all deserve a workplace within which we can excel as professionals. But as industry professionals, what can we do to bring this subject to the forefront? What can we do to make a business case for it? And I think part of it lies in essentially understanding the correlation between employee performance, productivity, and pollution, because there is a triangle at work here and it can no longer be ignored. So to tackle this very topic, fortunately, I'm joined by a panel of subject matter experts, and I ask that you please join me in welcoming them. With us, we have the gentleman you just heard from a moment ago, Senior Vice President, Brookfield Properties, Shantanu Chakrabarti. If I could please have you on stage once more, sir. And joining him, we have a highly decorated Army officer and Executive Director of the National Administration at KPMG, who leads operational logistics, Brigadier Harpreet Singh Kaura. Then we have the Associate Vice President and Head of Human Resources at NEC Technologies India, and a true human resources veteran, Kashish Daya Kapoor. Please. Then we have Senior Director, Employee Workspace Solutions, Adobe, and an internal champion for employee efficiency. Please join me in welcoming Sanjeev Sethi. And Director of Strategy and Marketing at Honeywell India, who drives the company's sustainable growth strategies, Piyush Arora. All right. With that, I ask everyone to please take their seats so we can kick off the conversation. This is of deep personal relevance to me, so I look forward to guiding this conversation. So perhaps I'm stating the obvious in saying that when it comes to pollution in the workplace, it's a looming but largely ignored issue. So I'd like to kick off the conversation with the question that I opened to the entire panel, and that is this. In your personal or your professional capacity, what have you done to draw more attention to the subject? And what's yet to be done in your opinion? I'd love to know where we stand to date and what the future holds, because the message trickles down from top leadership. Kashish, let's start with you there.
Good morning, everybody. Pleasure to be here today. I think the very fact that we are all in this room and we're discussing the topic is, it kind of outlines the fact that we become aware that this is important for us. What have we done as an organization and what we do in our everyday lives is a big question mark. We've started accepting that. We've not started measuring it. Till we don't measure it, we will not know the impact of it. So that's, I think, something which needs to be done. If I look at India today, and if I look at, NEC is a Japanese organization. If I go back and see, as a corporate, what we do in the headquarters, there are surveys that take into account and have started measuring what has been the impact of the mental stress and the workplace environment on an employee, and there are audits, and those are very serious matters. So I think we need to develop a mechanism internally within other geographies as well, and this is a good takeaway from Japan, where the air quality is much better than if you compare that to India, but they're still conscious about it. So I think acknowledging has happened. Measurement and work ahead is something which we all need to work together as industry professionals and experts on this.
Shantanu, I'd love to bring you in here. So we've crossed, or we've essentially crossed that chapter of acknowledgement, but not quite there in terms of measurement. How do we bridge this gap, and how wide is this gap? What's the difference between knowing and doing?
I think there is a gap because it doesn't really impact until and unless this whole issue becomes extremely severe. So that's why we see during the winter months people start wearing masks, because at that particular point of time the media is out on how the pollution is. You can really feel the pollution in your throat, in your eyes, and that's when it starts hitting us. But even when the pollution levels are I would say alarming, or say moderate, I won't even go to the alarming. It is slowly depleting from your well-being. Now that is very difficult to understand, and hence while we may be aware, taking action on it seems to be like a second priority. What we at Brookfield have realized is that this will be a very important issue, if not today, but in some years to come, because now the social media is so active, the media in general is so active, people are aware about their well-being. What we see in Delhi is really hitting in our eyes. And maybe that's why when we started internally debating about what actions we should take, we really didn't think about what will be the returns on action. Because the moment you do such kind of analysis and paralysis, so we do such kind of analysis, we'll actually go into paralysis. We'll not take action. So we said that, okay, let's go ahead and do it. And let's see what the impact is. Now, it's just been less than about a little over 6 to 7 months that we've actually taken some action. We are yet to see a direct correlation of it, but I think a start needs to be made. Experiment has to be made. Even if that experiment may not be a fruitful one, but we will learn from the experiment. I think what needs to be done today is, let's not shove the issue under the carpet. Let's shove the analysis under the carpet and say that, okay, yeah, let's do it. And if we do it, we will ultimately see some benefits to it. Or we'll see that there's no benefit and we'll realize that this doesn't work, or some new technology will come in. But I think today, the fact that we start, if the conversation even starts from, the measurement and all of that, I think we are really elongating the whole procedure of change. I think we need to accept the fact that we are living in an environment which is no less than a gas chamber, and we need to kind of address that. So whatever little we can do, we should just go ahead and do it, because it's already in a very severe levels.
Sure. Shantanu, you bring up a great point of hold off on the analysis to prevent the paralysis. But my question, and Brigadier, I'd love to bring you in here, is that if these experiments are conducted, how expensive are they, and is the cost justified?
Morning, everyone. You see, we become so cost-driven, while we will all have great things to say about our own organization, I also know KPMG is doing some great things. But overall, there is so much of pressure on, as a facility manager, we just had an internal discussion. It is very easy to save costs. But do I go to my stakeholders and say, okay, this is not the way to save costs? Do I put it across in a long-term perspective? The answer may not be yes, if I have to be truthful, right? See, the outdoor air, we are very perceptive about it because there's an odor, there's a humidity, there's a temperature factor. Now, this is what is coming inside, getting filtered to an extent, getting cooled to an extent, and also getting trapped. Now, the trapped, so-called cool and fresh air, the pollutants which are trapped inside tend to multiply much faster than what will happen outside. However, since we don't realize it, there is no odor attached to it unless it's a faulty system, you tend to dismiss it. The costs have to be seen in a long-term perspective gain, which is, just Kashish brought out, it's not easy to measure. That is where the disconnect lies. So, while we cannot put it on the millennials, that the millennials are, not aware of this, they are much more aware of this. It is those senior level guys like us and on the stakeholders, leadership level, maybe other side of 50s, who have to take this major decisions and incur those costs. There is no other way. And especially in India, I think nothing moves unless there's a regulatory on it. And in this space, even the regulatory in the US is also not in places yet. They're more like guidelines. And you know what happens with the guidelines. So, Pooja, we all have to put it there and accept those costs, maybe whatever will be the repercussion of it, and for a long-term benefit. It cannot be seen in a short-term perspective. Thank you.
Sure. And Brigadier, a lot of interesting takeaways there. And you mentioned the millennials. And I very recently came to learn that I, in fact, qualify as a millennial based on my date of birth. But that said, within my own organization, for example, I am nobody that's in a position of decision making, especially on a subject such as this. So while the millennial generation may be eco-friendly and future-ready, our impact is inherently limited. So Piyush, how do you address a gap like that?
See, I fundamentally believe, hi, first of all, morning, good to be here. I think as organizations and in general leadership, I think we are very good in problem solving, right? I think you asked an interesting question as to where we are, right? I think between the knowledge and the action lies acceptance. I think we are not at a stage where we accept the problem. The day we start accepting the problem, I'm sure we'll start acting on it. Let me just draw a parallel here. We see water every day. I mean, it doesn't present itself in a form which is muddy, but you just don't drink it, right? You don't drink it out of your tap water. But from the morning, when you wake up, to drinking an RO water, to carrying a water bottle which is mineral water, going to a restaurant or a dhaba, depending on the nature of the restaurant, you kind of use bottled or mineral water. We have accepted the reality that water, irrespective of the form it presents, is bad. Now, just a few statistics. Air pollution kills probably 3 more times than a foul water pollution, right? We talked about economics, right? Today, there is 5 to 6% productivity loss that certain studies in India and China have kind of shown when the air quality goes, above 50 in terms of the particulate matter. So I think the studies are there. I think there are very clear parallels which are drawn. I think it's up to us to really accept the problem. The day we accept the problem, I think all the leadership, I think, is going to act on this. So I think we are a bit away from accepting this as a reality, I think, and that's the gap.
Sure. And Sanjeev, let's bring you in here. Piyush, you brought up a point around acceptance, but I want to take back from what Shantanu said earlier, which is that the severity of the problem is uncertain. And secondly, he also mentioned that the time horizon is uncertain. So pollution in the workplace doesn't necessarily present itself as a ticking time bomb. Does science substantiate these claims, and are we not fully telling the story, or is this just simply not a critical issue?
Well, I think the issue is very critical. There's no doubt about the criticality of the issue. But it's about the onus of what people like us in this room do in our various organizations to influence the leadership around it. Right? So if you really see, this is not going to come from the West, because this is not a problem of the West. The air is very clean near the Alps. The air is very clean in California, in Canada, etc. So you're not going to draw inspiration from there. This has to be homegrown, as indigenous as, people may not like the word here, but as a Sulabh Sauchalaya, which was never found anywhere in the world, but India led the way on how to convert it into a big story. Now, these are the Pathaks of the Sulabh Sauchalaya, if I may say that. They have to come and influence the whole ecosystem and tell the leadership that you cannot talk in the currency of 5-star air conditioning system only, which actually, when you go and buy today from the market, has only one relevance: how will it reduce your energy bills? The fact of the matter is that 15 to 16% in an organization is electricity bill. 50% of that, which is 8% of your expense, is your air conditioning bill. If you go full throttle and get fresh air, you probably will spend 50% more or 30% more on that. So actually you're spending only 1 or 2% of your so-called budgets. What you get in return is sometimes you may not be able to measure directly or as tangibly as something else, but there is an aspect of presentism, and I don't know how much we have done to make our leadership aware of that. If you really look at studies done from Harvard and Cyprus universities, in India, in China, etc., and then they kind of extrapolated through statistics in the US. They said, if the US was as bad as India, it's a $150 billion game in US. Presentism actually means that you're present in office, but you're sick enough not to work to your full throttle of productivity. Not just that gap is $150 billion. If you map it to Australia, it's 35 or something, which is like 2 or 3% of their GDP. So how many times do we take the liberty, when we have opportunities, when we have corridor collisions with our CEOs, with our management, to strike these facts? And then there's have to be a downward pressure. And I've been fortunate, and I see 2 or 3 people here whom I've worked with in this space, that they're sitting in this room. We've been fortunate to spend that money and then show the results on televisions like this in the campus, saying, one of the things we did was last year and the year before that, when Delhi hits the peak of pollution somewhere in December, January, we get our air quality measured and we try to map it to the Alps, or we try to map it to Ottawa or something, so some very clean places, and tell the people that how much safer you when you work in the campus at Adobe vis-a-vis when you stay at home, right? Our presentism, our leave of absence there in those days, despite the fact that it's close to Christmas time, by the way, right? And multinational companies really wane off. It's hit the peak because people are conscious. They worry about their health anyways. So it's good to be there. And then if you're being there, you're going to do some software development, which we'll gain out of. So.
Sure, Sanjeev. And I really like the fact that you brought facts and figures into this conversation, because it is ultimately about looking at the subject through a scientific lens. And Kashish, I'd love to bring you back into the conversation here and understand, to what extent does pollution impact productivity? I mean, does it sort of cause a dip in our cognitive abilities, our ability to make decisions, our ability to retain information, to process large volumes of data? What is ultimately the impact of a polluted workplace environment?
I've been reading about this of late, and the pollutants, I think there is something called the fine particulate matter, which kind of impacts the indoor workspaces most, because ozone seems to come in and then dissolve and disappear. the fine particulate matter continues to stay. It triggers a chemical reaction within the indoor spaces, and that's where it triggers the impact. Now, the impact on my indoor air quality, if that is poor, is going to lead to a sluggish workforce. So decision-making, analytical ability are still, further on to think of and talk about. But I have a worker who's going to come into work who is going to be sluggish, will not have the highest energy level, would have gone through, so the whole commute first would have exposed that worker to an outdoor poor air quality, and then you walk into a space where there is, this whole fine particulate matter triggering a chemical reaction. So I have a heavy head, I'm sluggish, which will, as HR, I would say would, contribute towards my conflicts that happen at work, which is going to be which relate to behavioral issues, which will lead to performance dips. So all of the entire mind space is, has been impacted because of an external factor which could have been managed. And I feel we need to take this conversation and remove that line between work and home. As an organization, I own my employees. Their benefit is something which is very, very intrinsic to me. And I should look beyond work and home to make it, to bring in that consciousness among this workforce that, this is my health. So one hand, the organization is enabling me by providing me a good, conducive airspace, and it could be done by very small things like putting those air freshener plants, with the 5 plants which kind of get advertised on each employee's desk. I'm sure, it'll contribute 1%. The cost will not be so much of, there won't be huge budgets required for things like that. But we can start as small as that. And the minute I bring in that consciousness, decision making becomes much easier because you have this whole workforce who's talking about it. So the difference between, I'm also reducing the gap between how a millennial thinks and how a leadership thinks. For organizations where you have mature and a different generation of leadership, you need to bring in stories which hit their heart, because I'm sure if they are there in that age group of generation, they have kids who are in the millennial lot. So the minute you brought in these linkages and you've showed them how it's impacting productivity, how it's impacting, their kids may probably be coming to work in a similar manner, maybe working in spaces where they are not able to, prove or excel because of things like poor decision making, not being able to interact well, not poor colleague interaction, poor peer network, interactions, poor team buildings. All of these things, once they get to hear and once you tell them stories which are more close to heart, I think it'll bring a turnaround much faster than me showing them numbers or telling them, I'm sure that has an impact. But a story closer to heart has a quicker and a faster impact.
Sure, very valid. And, part of what makes this issue, hit the heart for me is that this is not strictly a corporate conversation. Shantanu, if someone's in the office for 12 hours a day, presumably the other 12 hours of the day, they are at home. So what can be done, within not just the corporate space, but on a personal level from household decision makers, such that they even embrace the mindset to take action?
Yeah, sure. So I think, before I answer that question, this is one thought, and I think that
Please.
thought I would like to share because it'll probably resonate with everybody here.
Sure.
Last 5-6 years, the entire workplace, let me call it industry, focused a lot on ergonomics, right? Focused a lot on how your posture should be, whether you should stand and work. As a result, you've got fantastic chairs now which cost as much as 50,000-60,000 rupees per chair, right? There are tables, workstations which can go up, down, automatic stuff like that. All of this has come in. This is ergonomics. This is something which is physical, right? And that is all because it is creating discomfort. Now, when you add to that, or even take that away, but you look at the fact that the air that you're breathing in is causing you discomfort, and you're doing that on a day-to-day basis, and you can't help about it, because posture you can help, you can do yoga, you can do 10 other things, you can, be self-conscious, you can do that.
So you can't bring your own oxygen tank to work.
You can't bring oxygen tank to work. So what needs to be done, right? And of course, what Sanjeev mentioned is very pertinent. Everything ultimately boils down to economics, right? It also boils down to marketing, right? Today, I think we have not marketed this problem well enough, right? The guys like Steelcase and Human Scale and all of that has marketed the whole ergonomics much better than what probably, and I think that's where I think you have to come in. You have to market this problem much better than what we are doing today. It's hitting on our face today because we see the fact that 15 out of top 20 cities which are polluted are in India, and that's why it is an India problem. It's not a world problem, which Sanjeev really mentioned. Don't look at US, don't look at Europe. You have to look here. Coming back to your question about what can be done to ensure that we embrace this as a life principle and not just a workplace principle, is that if you start at workplace, it'll probably permeate into your residence, and it'll make a bigger impact to a larger society. And it's all about creating that awareness, right? If an organization stands up today, in say when they go to recruit for IIT or some of the big campuses, the reason you need to work here is because you will have a clean environment like the Alps, right? Are we making those points today? I think we're not making those points today, and if we start making those points today, I think the change will come, gradually.
Sure. Well, I think that leads me to my next question, Piyush, which is, how can we make that change? How can you in positions of leadership make the change? I mean, clearly, I don't think individuals such as yourselves can be expected to research air purifiers or perhaps be the internal champion for replacing archaic equipment, within your own corporate infrastructures. So what's required here from you?
See, I think I'll just break this solution into two parts. I think one is preventive and the other is corrective. Right? I think preventive is all the points that even Kashish talked about, and things that we can do from a design standpoint. Right? How do we create a bit more uncluttered spaces, which by the way also comes at a cost. Right? How can we ensure that we use materials which are more eco-friendly and absolutely those kind of things. So I think there are things that we can do from a preventive. How can we create and design workspaces which are more open air, give you more ventilation, right? Because one of the biggest problems that aggravates this entire pollution internally is the fact that it's airtight. But having said that, one, you cannot wish away that pollution which is happening, because it's happening through volatile organic compounds, it's happening because of the PVC that is there currently in your wires, in your tilings, it's because of the biological elements like bacteria, virus, fungi, molds, etc. They won't wish away tomorrow, right? So it will happen, and on top of that, the HVAC systems today, I think someone was making this point, they will actually suck in air from outside and circulate, and with the outside air itself is bad, you need to correct it, right? And I think correction is where it is important, and that's where I think from a solution providing perspective, we believe, there are two types of solutions, right? One is pretty much mechanical, where you just put filters and stuff, but then those take a hit on your energy cost. So the other solutions that are pretty much there are what we call electronic air cleaning, which sit along with your HU, which are very easy to retrofit, so it doesn't require you to overhaul your equipment. It works on very small pressure drops, which again corresponds to the fact that your energy efficiency is intact. Today, in most of the organizations, and Brookfield being one of the pioneers there, we see the paybacks, even if you include energy efficiency costs, and the payback is 1.5 odd years, right? So the economics work. Economics has to work because I think a recent JLL study was talking, it talks about a 330-300 ratio, right? Which is 3 rupees is the cost per square feet that you pay for your energy costs, for your maintenance. 30 is the cost that you pay for rent per square foot, and 300 is actually the cost per employee, right? So anything that you do for the employee is going to make ROI very, very fast. So I think these are in place. From a Honeywell standpoint, we are very, very conscious that this is, I think we all talked about, is a very India and growth economy related problem. So we are creating solutions which are very much, suited towards that. Very conscious to the fact that it needs to be put in without much extra cost. So I think it is there, but I think it is all about, as I think Sanjeev talked about, it is all about ensuring that it gets the corporate leadership mindshare and acceptance to that problem.
And yeah, Brigadier, I was just
right.
getting to you because I wanted to understand, Piyush has very clearly outlined a lot of the cost efficiencies, but do these statistics come as a surprise?
No, definitely not. Definitely not. You see, I just want to take this opportunity also. When you become a part of this forum, you tend to read a lot before you put on the stage here. I confess, I learned a lot in the last 8-10 days when I got invited. You see, what Piyush just mentioned, what are the mitigating factors we are installing to get the air ventilation systems better and better? Longer ducting systems, longer evacuation chimney shafts. Now, the very interesting thing, which is substantiated by the science, something called, all these are producing something called the infrasound. I request you all to have a look at it in the Google. Infrasound is anything which is less than 16 hertz and a human ear cannot perceive it. However, your body can perceive it. Your tummy churns, you'll get nauseatic, you get dizzy in the office, you get sluggish, like Kashish said. Infrasound is whenever we see, the bigger the air conditioning plants, the bigger the generators, and these small vibrations which are not perceivable otherwise are producing infrasound which is around you and me all the time, maybe here also. And this is another thing which is looming in the dark at the moment. There are many studies there that this also would at some point of time need to be controlled. It's a very interesting thing. Yeah, I would request all those who are keen on this, do have a look at this. And to correlate it, a lot of countries are developing infrasounds as a non-lethal weapon, right? You want to disperse a crowd, you generate infrasound. The crowd disperses because people start feeling uncomfortable. And this is what is happening in our indoor environments today, without any of us realizing it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Brigadier brings up many interesting points there. And, Sanjeev, what I very recently came to learn to my surprise was that indoor air quality or pollution levels, if you will, can be as much as 10x what outdoor pollution levels are, even though completely naked, completely not visible to the naked eye, essentially. So, that leads me to ask, what is the solution? Obviously we can't set up makeshift offices in the mountains or set up shop on the beach as much as we may want. So how do we take that statistic and make good on it?
You could do it in two parts. One is that assume that an office exists, and one is when you make a new office. Let's assume our offices are what our offices are, right? And the solution is not very tough. There's some, in fact, I met a vendor also where Piyush's company also solves these issues. But fundamentally, there are two things. That 2.5 particles and the freshness, right? The freshness comes from the fact that you have a minimum number of air changes. And what's an air change? Air change is that this is the air in this room, and we're all breathing out carbon dioxide. And how much time will we displace this whole air by a fresh air which is coming from outside, right? So there are standards of 8 times in a day, etc., or 9 times in a day. So you change you open your fresh air ducts in a fashion that this happens. Now, the downside is what? The downside is, especially in the summers, the air is at 45, 48 degrees temperature, and you have to cool it down to 24 degrees, 23 degrees, whatever your comfortable standards are, and therefore there's a little bit more of energy spent, right? That's one point. The second point is, what do you do about dust? There are filters where this fresh air which is coming in, you could filter it. But when you filter it, such a fine filter that you need a fan to gush that air through that filter. So there's a little more energy there. So all in all, you're trying to spend a little more money to get that fresh air with a clean parameter. The third stage probably is that when you are already in, and if you can't actually retrofit your systems, you go into your internal air handling units and do some electronic precipitation and make the dust fall to the ground, and you sweep it from the ground, somewhere from where the air is being pumped to, right? So that's the third level of things. So as a combination of 1 or 2 or 3, depending on how much you could influence your leadership. And by the way, he set me thinking, how do you market this to the leadership? And Kashish's comment was very loud. We all think that the employees will be less productive, right? The finger on me gets absent. So somebody has to tell the leadership, this is about us not being productive as leaders also. If the cognitive ability of those 2,000 or 200 or 20 people in my company is getting impacted, so is your Mr. MD, and so is mine, right? And we need a change. The best gift I would give you to, give it to you on your birthday is give you an air purifier for your personal office, right? And the chain probably starts from there. I would, if I have a little bit of guts tomorrow, and I'd actually go and gift an air purifier to my MD in his room, right? And say, let's start the conversation about how it impacts you and how, because everybody who's lived in air purifier, especially in Delhi, correct me if I'm wrong, if you put an air purifier in your bedroom in the month of December, January, you feel the difference. Especially senior citizens feel the difference, and everybody, parents at home, uncles at home, aunts at home, they say that this thing works. So if this thing works, it'll work there also, right?
Yes, fascinating. And, Shantanu, I pose this next question to you, which is, truthfully, to what extent can internal management shape, workplace efficiency? Is this truly within their role and responsibility, or is this the role and responsibility of an outside third party, a vendor, a consultant, essentially someone from outside the organization?
No, I think it has to be championed internally. The vendors and the external people will only be supporters or partners, right? And how so like Honeywell is provider of a solution. Now that solution comes at a cost. Now an organization may not be willing to bear that cost because of whatever reasons. All organizations go through different stages of financial stability, instability, budgets and stuff like that. This may be a unplanned budget. I think we as developers come to that front, because at the end of the day, that infrastructure in some way we have a lot of contribution to that, and there's always this whole capex versus opex kind of a discussion and a solution. One of course is this whole solution, it will demand capex and it will also demand opex, right? Now in a lot of organizations I've seen that opex is an easier thing to solve because of the minusculity of the quantum. It's a capex that gets people a little nervous.
Sure.
And specifically if you're looking at a workplace manager, right? His budgets are housekeeping, security, beverages and stuff like that. And then you push into that a huge capex of changing air filters. He will say, the entire effort required to make the business case justification, which itself, let him be a little wary of the thing. Where we can come in is we can kind of change that whole thing to say that, okay, we as developers are willing to invest, right? But we'll recover that from you over a period of time. Because if this solution is for a longer term period, why can't we make it aligned to that whole thought process? If you are aware of what the situation, you accept the situation that this will impact, may not be today, but even over a period of 5 years, I'll spread that cost out to you with an amortization over a period of 5 years, and will you be willing to pay? Now, that's a question I would like to ask to Brigadier Kaura or Sanjeev, that if you are if you are in that situation, and if costs would be a challenge, and KPMG and Adobe may not be the right examples for that because you are pretty cash rich, but still there are organizations out there which may be startups, smaller organizations which may deal with such situations. Would this kind of a model help you in championing this cause internally?
Let me. I think you used a very interesting word, unplanned budget. I think all of us, we start struggling somewhere in November, December onwards when the budget starts getting formed up and the CFO and everyone has to give a green tick there. And push it at that time we got this into a planned budget this current financial year. We've done it about 40% installation we've done, some with Honeywell, some with another good firm called Blue Air. And because that is the time you have to push it with the leadership. And we tend to be a little conservative at that time because you're pre-told this is zero budget baseline, and this time you will not go across this. That is the time you can push this. And you have to step out and take it head on with the leadership, and people understand. People do understand. Then it is much easier to sail it through. And then once you have got your foot into the door, then one place has got it, and the next one says he's got it. That business has got it, that floor has got it, that building has got it. And it also depends a lot in what vintage of a building are you sitting. No names, we are the largest occupiers, amongst the largest occupiers in the DLF Cyber City. And in this space, there is very little support you get from the developers who are sitting on vintage assets like this. Yes, of course, Candor is coming out with new assets. I much appreciate that. So that is another fight you have to do. I mean, the capex spent in a vintage building which is not designed for all this is much more than what I would probably do in Candor next time. And then your maintenance protocols, like Sanjeev brought, how frequently and how seriously and honestly the guys are doing the filter cleanings, all those things come into play. Thank you.
Sure. And before we open up the floor for question and answer, I'd like to pose my last question by way of closing comments to the entire panel. And Brigadier, we'll start with you. In a single sentence, if you had to describe the future of workspace efficiency in the larger Indian landscape, what would it be?
Purely efficient.
Sir, the mic, please.
It has to be purely efficient, right?
Let's hear from you, Piyush.
I'll just stop at pure.
Stop it pure, love that. All right, Sanjeev, sir.
I think a lot will depend on the overall well-being of the employee, emotional and physical.
Emotional and physical well-being, ma'am?
I think I'll just go with saying that it's going to be orchestrating a brighter future. And on a lighter note, I think I would also like to add that if ET plans to come out with Workspace Efficiency Awards, that will really give a push to this.
Noted, ma'am. And Shantanu, I'll give you the last word.
I think it's not a cost game, it's a value game. Where we all falter is that we look at costs, we don't see the value it will create. If we can make differentiation between cost and value, which is a economic philosophy, it's not a pricing philosophy. If we can understand that, if we can imbibe that, I think this is a cakewalk.
Well, with that, this panel has shared so many anecdotes from their personal and professional journeys when it comes to workspace efficiency. And for that, I believe that a huge round of applause is deeply deserved, ladies and gentlemen. But as I mentioned earlier, this conversation is intended for you. So if there are any questions, and I see a few hands popping up, we'll get a microphone to you. Please introduce yourself briefly and state your question. If it's for a specific panelist, let us know that as well. Please, sir, introduce yourself.
My name is Jayadhar Gupta. I'm an environmental activist and an entrepreneur. I'm also the founder of a citizens movement called My Right to Breathe. I think corporates have manifold responsibilities here. Clean air is clearly a differentiator, there's no question about it. The focus needs to be on, I think this is a health and safety compliance more than anything else. For the same reason that a construction worker needs to wear a hard hat while on the construction site, you need to be compliant. I mean, let's keep it in mind that out of all the 3 materials we consume, our body needs every day, air is the largest, 12,000 liters a day. Even in kilograms, we breathe 14 kilograms of air in a day. I think the responsibility with corporates, and I say this as an activist as well, is you need to sensitize your employees. I mean, essentially, the reason why we are not doing anything as a country today about air pollution is because the vote bank doesn't exist. Nobody cares about air because nobody understands air. Once you guys do start doing it at your workplace, the sensitivity will increase. That same worker, when they're walking out of your, Swiss Alps air out of your buildings and walking into PM levels of 500, they're going to feel their chest muscles expand because of the heaviness in the air outside. They're going to feel the poison in the air, which is not happening today. So I think there's a greater responsibility here. And my office is, we maintain Swiss Alps air, and I can tell you, I never want to leave my office. We have more plants than people. We have all kinds of, particulate filters and whatnot, and all the monitoring and a beautiful digital board that shows outdoor air, indoor air. We can sit there and do pranayam all day long.
So thank you for sharing that. Yes, we have a few questions right here towards the center tables. If we could please get microphones to these gentlemen. All right. And sir, I ask that you please introduce yourself and then pose your question.
My name is S.N. Sharma. I am a small entrepreneur.
Sir, do you mind standing up?
Yeah. My question is to all the panelists. You see, we have talked, all the panelists have talked about the workspace for the official work. Say there is a workspace in the manufacturing industry, steel plant, paper plant, textile mill, food processing industry, where 80% of the total workforce works there. They spend more time. Only 10% of the total workforce work in the air conditioned and the environment which we have talked about. Now my question to you is, are you not concerned about the productivity, of the outcome, of the health of those persons who are working on the shop floor?
Very valid
who
question.
are more affected, and their productivity, that affect the GDP, that affect the ROI, everything, not in the person who are working in the air conditioner chambers.
Absolutely.
And my second question to you, can you name any building in Delhi which conform to international standard? The air which we are inhaling in this hall, is it perfect as per the international standard? I can say no. Even Rashtrapati Bhavan or the Prime Minister's office is also not conforming to the international standard.
So I, having come from Bombay myself, would be very curious to know the answer to your second question as well. Yeah. So, who from the panel would like to take the first question?
I would like to take, there are 2 questions he asked. And I think you're very right, sir. I think with people who wear suit, boots, ties and live in plush apartments or work in these offices, it is very obvious that we sometimes tend to negate and forget about what happens in industries. So while we are not yet the investors in industrial space, but let me assure you that when we do that, you will see the same amount of appreciation and thought process going behind designing them. And I'm sure that because the stakeholders on the stage today represent a large part of the IT office workforce, the discussion was more surrounded about closed office environments and not factories. Coming to your point about in India or in Delhi, is there a building which adheres to the global international standards? The answer is yes. It's a small start. We in our property itself have ensured, and we've partnered with Honeywell in that to ensure that our AHUs take care of not just PM 2.5 but even slightly lower than that. We're also taking care of CO2 and other gaseous substances which do permeate into the environment, and we did it more so because we saw this as a problem. We saw this as a problem in some of our existing buildings as well. By the way, when we took over some of the buildings as a part of the acquisition, we realized and we hit with the Delhi pollution. We realized that is not what an ideal environment is going to be, and we need to be proactive in giving the solution to our occupiers, and we did that. So there is a building, and I think slowly the developer community will become aware and start doing this on its own. It's a start. It's a small change, but it'll go a long way to get addressed overall.
Shantanu, can I just add to that?
Please.
So, Sharmaji, just adding to your point, I think, as Shantanu said, I think since this forum was more, talking about the inner spaces, I think similar debate and similar topics are being talked about in industrial. I mean, as again, Honeywell being a solution provider, we have solutions in that space as well, whether it's mask, whether it's gas detector. I think the problems there are also very different because, I mean, for example, I've worked a lot in the steel and mining space. One of the biggest issues there is carbon monoxide, right? That's the silent killer, and that's the biggest killer in a lot of spaces. So there is a lot of debate there, but I think the challenges there are very similar. Their knowledge of the fact that air is bad is far more prevalent than the understanding of that bad quality of air here. I think there again the issue is cost of how do you ensure that you create that environment for your staff and for your workers at the right cost points and to be able to make it safer. On the second point, on a lighter side, I think you talked about Rashtrapati Bhavan, and we had talked about that impacting decision making. I think I see some correlation there. I think some of the biggest decisions are made there. I think we need to do something about that.
I think that deserves some applause.
A purifier for somebody you don't want to name, right?
I didn't go to Parliament for that reason.
Yeah. It's safe not to go there. But on your very tangible question of which are these buildings, and there are pretty decent number of buildings which you can visit. I can start. Paharpur Business Center, go to Nehru Place, you will find. Go and check the air qualities there. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. Go to the Godrej Center in Mumbai. You will be very pleasantly surprised at what's the air quality. Come to our office at Noida. The biggest pollutants today, even in the city of Delhi or Beijing, whichever it may be, they start from dust, which is SPM, then they go to ppm 10, PM 2.5, SOx, NOx, lead. By and large, these are your main culprits. Come to our building and you will see monitoring, active monitoring at every minute. You can see what the levels are, and I'm, there's a gentleman there who was speaking about the Paryavaran. His office probably could be an example. You could go there. But I do want to respond to you, sir, who talked about the workplace responsibility. It's a hard problem to solve. We think that this is the ecosystem of the world, but as she said earlier, the world is much bigger than workplace managers, and real businesses you may have a business which is connected to this line and you can afford to have an office like this. You may not. But if you actually think where the right pressure could be to influence the leadership, empathy, right? घर में सच बोलोगे तो ऑफिस में भी बोलोगे. घर में empathetic रहोगे तो ऑफिस में. Things of right value started being ingrained in us in schools, in colleges, and at homes, and then they landed into workplace, right? Including smoking, by the way, at one point of time. But that's a bad one. But there is no awareness on any curriculum in school, any curriculum in college, which makes a child aware that he or she has to be in the right environment in terms of air. Now, how about influencing from there? Because by the time the workforce actually comes into the office, they expect that as a given table stake, right? So if somebody can influence that aspect in universities at least, at the finishing schools where you're just about to enter the workforce, that could be a driver.
Sach kaha sir ne. And with that, we have time for... Sir, let's have a mic come to you so that we can hear you. And that leaves us with time for just our last question. Oh gosh, okay, we're going to really have to cut this short, but I assure you all of our panelists will be available to engage in conversation with you offline. So I think for sake of keeping it fair, I will draw the conversation to a close right here, but I'll also add that while a long journey lies ahead in terms of making workspace efficiency the norm, conversations like this certainly make for a critical first step. So with that, I thank not only the audience, but the stellar lineup of panelists right here next to me. Huge round of applause, please. Now, we just heard a rich range of perspectives from a very well-informed, dynamic, multifaceted panel. But as they say, seeing is believing. So next, we bring you an audio visual that sort of essentially highlights the extent of the workspace efficiency problem and puzzle, and the various competing dynamics at work here. So, if you could please turn your attention towards the plasma screen behind me, and if we could play the audio visual.
India is one of the most polluted countries in the world. The outdoor air is polluted, and it is growing at an alarming rate every single day, every possible second, bringing with it a lot of health problems. But not many of us are aware that the indoor air is 10 times more harmful than the outdoor air. In an office environment, we spend approximately 90% of our time indoors. The risks to our health is greater when exposed to air pollution indoors than outdoors. Something we cannot see and fathom, but sadly, it's there and we need to address it right now. The longer people are exposed to indoor air pollution, like in an office, the more susceptible they are to its effects. Thus, they fall sick more often, and the overall work productivity takes a hit.
Outdoor air is polluted, we all know that, but the effects of indoor pollution is even worse. I sometimes get headache, I feel short of breath, and sometimes I feel dizziness. So I have to step out of the office more often and take more breaks so that I can concentrate on my work better.
Overall air pollution impacts productivity at workplace. And given that employees spend 1/3 of their time in the office space, the indoor air quality impacts their efficiencies. In fact, we have employees coming to us complaining about respiratory issues, skin irritation, eye allergies while they're at work. Therefore, it's become imperative that organizations should look at indoor air quality as an overall strategy. Organizations like ours and many others have made indoor air quality their top point agenda in the employee wellness and well-being strategy.
There's still hope in the air. The indoor air can be brought under leash. It's time to take control of the indoor air before it takes control. Candor and Honeywell have strategically come together to create healthier workspaces by installing electronic air cleaner in centralized air conditioner. They are advanced, super efficient systems with path-breaking innovation, committed to regulate the air quality of workspaces.
Honeywell is a Fortune 100 company in diversified portfolios across technology and manufacturing. For the last 100 years, we've been providing energy solutions across the world. more than 10 million buildings have been using our solutions. We are very proud to partner with Candor TechSpace in the field of electronic air cleaning. Our products have been certified by UL. What we also bring to the space is about improving employee productivity and having a very clean and safe environment for people to work in.
This is truly a new beginning, a milieu of technology and human support to usher in health, a healthier work environment, and overall a better living.
At Brookfield Properties, we understand the evolving needs of workspace requirements, and as global partners of choice to many occupiers, we are committed to provide healthier workspace environment. To build on our global vision in this field, we have partnered with Honeywell to take care of major concerns on indoor air quality in our Candor TechSpace campuses. We have achieved this by installing highly efficient and modern air quality monitoring systems and air purifying systems in our campuses. We believe with this effort, our campuses will have enhanced comfort for the occupiers, healthier work-life balance, and higher productivity for the occupiers.
We as a thought leader feel that you deserve a healthy workspace to come to every day.
There is a definite change in the air. I feel more energetic and relaxed.
After all, whatever we do and whatever we create is done keeping you at the center.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as this video just hinted at, the corporate climate is becoming increasingly competitive, which makes it all the more critical for people in decision-making capacities to create work environments within which their employees can survive and thrive. So to share her perspective on what makes for a conducive work environment and the extent to which it matters, next we bring you a very special guest, a policy maker with an impeccable track record in public service. Please join me in welcoming IAS and Secretary at New Delhi Municipal Council, Dr. Rashmi Singh. We can have Dr. Rashmi Singh on stage, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to give my heartiest compliments and congratulations for the organizers to have organized a summit on a subject which is of great contemporary relevance for all of us. And I'm aware of the fact that mostly people over here would represent different industries and private sector. But I can assure you that coming from the government space, the kind of prioritization which this subject has been getting over the period, the kind of focus, attention which we have, internally being seen within the government, it is unparalleled. We had never seen it before. So you can, imagine how much of importance each one of us, the various stakeholders, various departments, because even within the government, it's not that there's a particular department only which is seized with it, which would have been a natural assumption. The natural assumption would have been it is the Department of, or the Ministry of Environment, which should be seized with this matter. But over the period, we've seen the times when the various stakeholders involved in the government, be it our health, be it our industries, and the municipal bodies, the urban development departments. So we've all been kind of putting our heads together. In fact, recently, even at Niti Aayog, there was a deliberation with focused attention on what we are doing in Delhi for, say, our landfill sites, the kind of legacy waste which has been created, which is leading to, the vulnerability to toxic gases being emitted. Some of you who would be from Delhi would be familiar with it. So putting our heads together that, what do we owe it for our future generation? It's not just today, but also for the future, that we need to be better conscious and seize the challenges that we see today and look at the kind of solutions which are very, very important to be taken in a timely manner. As far as my current role is concerned, since I do represent a municipal body which is supposed to be one of the premier institutions in the country, sitting at the heart of the Delhi, the New Delhi, and that to the Lutyens Delhi, which by itself is looking at various kinds of solutions to the problems which can have a cascading effect. Because we are aware that we are in a position to create models, look at good practices, adopt those good practices. And often there are times when there are other municipal bodies which come and look at what NDMC has done and try and replicate it to other places. So being conscious of this responsibility, all the more reason that we look at the challenge in a more holistic manner. And I'd like to tell you that there are two ways in which we kind of respond to address the problem of air pollution. One is regulatory and the other is promotive. In the regulatory, there are many acts, which we are bound to look at the statutory compliances, say the C&D waste, which is the construction and demolition waste. So I would encourage you to also look at what the legal provisions are, because the legal provisions do mandate and cast a certain responsibility on those who are at the hem of, be it in this case, say the construction industry. So, then the plastic waste management rules. And the third is, I would say, the solid waste management rules. So, these are some of the acts that we look at. Then number two is the promotive role. And here it is very important now that the discussion, which I saw happening over here, in terms of being, first of all, conscious of what we are living in terms of our environment, the workspace. So where does that consciousness start from? It has to start young. Because somebody just said that, is it really a part of the curriculum, for the children? And earlier probably it was not, that much of a discourse. And our science books, our textbooks, whether science or civic books, which teaches us our constitutional responsibilities, our fundamental rights and duties, would probably not talk about this dimension. But I must say that today, for most of the schools, which are looking at, making our children more globally informed and laced with solutions to the contemporary challenges, they are, right from the early age, trying to impart the consciousness which it needs for every child to know what it means to have pure air and impure air and the detrimental effect it will have on our health. So we have something called the eco clubs. So in the eco clubs, we do have air pollution, environment, habitat as one of the major areas of concern which our children are encouraged to look at. We have special internships given to them, to our school children, to our college children. And in the NDMC area, I must say that even though in terms of direct workforce that we would employ, we may be impacting probably just 20,000, but there are so many offices which are here in the area, and as a civic body, for that matter, any civic body, has to not only be concerned about its own direct workforce, but all the other office spaces, the habitats, even the residential areas, that we are supposed to be more responsive towards ensuring that good citizen civic services are provided to them. So one way is that, okay, you think of, probably reaching out to each household and making sure that they live in a better, air environment directly. But I know that it's a tall claim. Even though we can't do it directly, there are ways in which we can impact and influence the thinking process. So how do we do that? Besides the children that I spoke about, we also do it by impacting the thinking process amongst the resident welfare associations, the market trader associations, then even other bodies, the civil society actors, who are working with different stakeholders. There are people who are working with e-waste, electronic waste. So we do have like special agreement for the various types of waste also, like the C&D waste, the electronic waste, and say in terms of segments, even the rag pickers. They would also have that. So how do we make people more conscious, sensitize them, and make sure that it's like right there, top on their agenda? And we also realize that it's not just enough to be talking in terms of like making, air pure by providing one or two solutions alone. We realize that, okay, it's a whole gamut where we need to become conscious right from the time that we are looking at our waste, the manner in which we are doing the segregation of waste, which we call, say, segregation at the source, the dry waste to the green waste. Now making people aware, where does it go? It's a whole chain. Where is it finally going to the landfill site? Is it finally going to the place where we are converting it into making energy, which we do? We do have a plant, say, in Okla, where we are sending our waste to be converted into energy. But at the same time, we have biomethanization plant. At the same time, we have something called an organic waste compactor, where we are, using the green waste to turn into local compost, and that compost can further be used for our horticulture purpose. Then for our horticulture purpose, we have something called like, small STPs, the sewage treatment plants running on a PPP model in most of our parks, where we are using the water which would have otherwise been wasted, to be further recycled back into making our parks, better with local conservation of the water. And today, as you'd be aware, that there's a lot of importance being given to this sector of water conservation. And a new ministry has been formed for it, which is the Ministry of Jal Shakti, where again, all these things are correlated. So I can't just look at, a pollution in isolation, because somewhere the pollution is coming from. So let's understand. I mean, if we are not segregating, say, plastic at source, where is it ultimately going? Is it being burnt? Is it creating more, damage to our lungs, to our, adding on to the respiratory diseases? So let people start questioning it is our first and foremost responsibility. Then we also are like looking at other, ways in which making people more, conscious and aware and providing them alternative solutions, like smart mobility. Now, what is that mobility? That mobility is looking at non-motorized ways of transport also. Because we do believe that vehicular pollution, is one of the major causes for adding on to the, the particulates that we find in the air. And some of you from Delhi would have seen that recently we came up with, a biking solution, which is like a shared bike, where you don't need to own it. You can take it on rent. You can take it on a monthly payment. You'll have a card, and you can just pick it up from one location and drop it to another location, for which we have different docking stations made in the NDMC area. So that is like, once on here. Then number two, to encourage the electric vehicles. While in our civic body, we had started using a number of electric vehicles ourselves, but we know that more is needed in the public space, and to promote that, we've come up with e-charging facilities, which you'll find in a number of public spaces. And it's really economical. I'll tell you, you can get the whole, refill done in of a car in just 100 rupees. So these would be some of the revolutionary steps. And then another thing which I'd like to share is that it is also important to make people aware what the level of our, the pollution level is. Somebody just talked about it, so we are also encouraging that and sharing it in the public domain. So we have environmental sensors. So right now we started with those in Connaught Place area. And so we can measure on a real-time basis and also share it on the public domain through, there are public information boards displayed through which we try and make, let the attention of people be, kind of drawn towards what air we are breathing. Another thing which we recently came up with, which is an interesting experiment, but again towards, building a larger coalition towards looking at good air, clean air, safe air. Now, what is that? So that's a project for pedestrianization of inner circle of Connaught Place. So we did just one pilot, and I was there personally on a weekend, battling a lot of challenges that we found, because everybody is so used to just bringing their vehicle and parking it right outside the shop in Connaught Place. So it was a huge challenge, because that meant really kind of challenging, people to look at other alternative ways in which you can still enjoy a shopping experience, but you don't necessarily have to, park the vehicle right in front of the shop, because people have just forgotten that we need the roads, are there not only for the vehicles, but you can walk, you enjoy the walk. I mean, look at the beautiful area of Connaught Place where, there's so much of heritage value to it. So that one pilot was, in my view, and also the kind of responses that we received from the media, it was successful. However, we have not yet managed to convince the traders. I don't know if somebody's from there, but the Market Trader Association of Connaught Place to accept the fact that let us now promote it on a regular basis. Because ultimately that feeling of shared space for everyone, and not just for those who are coming to CP just to shop, but otherwise also, let's look at. So, but I tell you that the good part was that the people's reactions of those who were plying, using their bike on the inner circle, those who were walking there or probably just playing a guitar over there, they were all talking about this aspect that today you are concerned with. Wow, it is like clean air, no honking. Everybody's so used to the honking that, suddenly that noise pollution gone. And so these are positive. So it's I think that more of responsibility on bodies like ours, to make different stakeholders, different stakeholders more aware to be able to, I would say, build a collective voice. Build a collective voice that, yes, we care for the environment, and these are the ways in which, probably we can improve the quality of our environment. So I tell you, it's not easy, because I do realize that there are certain, different interests working. Everybody would not want to think and look at the long-term, perspectives. Because people feel that, okay, let's do only what is convenient for us and what we can do it on an, immediate return basis. So while we are working for our environment, while we are working towards improving, the air quality, improving the air quality within the workspace and outside, where we are coming to be a part of the workplace with a healthy mind, with a rejuvenated mind, with positive energy. So build that. I think, what you're doing is something appreciable, because we are talking about it. We are building consciousness. And we need to do it more. Because probably I feel that there are much more complex things today in a country that people are kind of seized of. My livelihood, what is the wage I'm getting, my health, and, the so-called, the issue of roti, kapda, makan. So roti, kapda और मकान के मेरा ये मानना है कि उस संबंध में हम कहीं ना कहीं हम उन चीज़ों को भूल जाते हैं जिसका संबंध है हमारे क्वालिटी ऑफ लाइफ से, मतलब हायर पैरामीटर्स क्या हैं. So I would agree that these are the basic necessities. At the same time, we need to make people more aware that, let's look at the times when we were healthier, why we were healthier, what made us healthier. So these things, while we are encouraging our children to think about, at the same time, we are having another, alternate way in which there's a discourse to influence people's behavior. You might have heard of it, which is through alternate therapy of Ayush. So we have encouraged yoga as a regular practice, not just leaving it for 21st June, the International Yoga Day. So in many of the parks of Delhi, you go to Lodi Garden, you go to Nehru Garden, you'll find that there are several groups who are coming there, and it is like actually the lungs of our Lutyens Delhi, these parks. And while they are like, at the yoga, it is not just like as a physical exercise. I can clearly see that, they are into the meditative practice, they are into breathing practice, they are becoming more aware that this is the small area in which I can take clean air. So that consciousness is seeping in. But, obviously much more needs to be done. Another way in which we are encouraging, people's participation, the kind of broader coalition is by involving people on a sustained manner for a greening initiative. This is something which in Lutyens Delhi, we have given a lot of importance, in terms of not only our direct interventions of keeping the Lutyens Delhi greenest, I would say, not only in the whole of the country, but even according to international standards. You'd find that the kind of green space that we have, kind of 48% cover of like green space that, you'd probably have over here. So how to keep it, as vibrant is by involving people. So for most of, like these days, during the monsoon season, every weekend, we have huge mass plantation, and particularly looking at plants, which can have the effect of arresting the pollution level. And there are plants, we all know, which have that property. And you'd find that at a lot of places there are vertical gardens. So this is again something which not only in the public space, but also like, offices, we can encourage such things of. So there again, we've played a pioneering role, because there are many municipalities who come and look at, okay, what's been done for such landscaping, for such greening, what are the kind of plants, and we also have something called a hybrid, like high-tech nursery, where we are, growing these plants ourselves. And in times to come, we can also hope that there's, greater participation of people, where we can actually give them these plants, which they can nurture, probably buy it at a smaller cost. So, all these things are in the offing. But I do feel that it is important in the end, in terms of my takeaway, that don't look at it as in a segmented approach. It is very important that we look at this entire, value chain, which is, leading to the problem, and play our critical role, each one of us, to find ourselves to be the vital actor, to contribute to the maximum extent, to improve the air quality. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that, ma'am, for those very inspiring words. And on that note, we'll break for tea at this time. So in exactly 15 minutes, please join us back in this room, because the ETRealty Workspace Efficiency Summit shall continue. Thank you. 360-degree perspective, namely from the financial, medical, ethical, legal, and economical lens alike. And to do just that, next we bring you two very special guests to engage in a fireside chat. The conversation promises to be very exciting, and I ask that you please join me in welcoming internationally recognized medical expert and consultant respirologist at PD Hinduja National Hospital and Medical Research Center, Dr. Lancelot Pinto. Huge round of applause for Dr. Pinto. And joining him, the editor of Economic Times Energy World, Sudhir Singh. Please. With that, gentlemen, take it away.
The kind of expertise that we have with us on the stage, who would be a better person than him to talk to on this topic? So broadly, the discussion is likely to run for around, let's say, 45 minutes or so. There'll be a small discussion followed by a round of Q&As. So I would like to begin, Doctor, by asking you I like to keep things broad. So let's first try and understand what is indoor air pollution all about. And basically, if you can help us understand, so the larger perception that the larger public understanding of pollution is about power plants, spewing emissions into the atmosphere. So is that linked to indoor air pollution, and how? What are the sources? How harmful it is? What is its impact? So the basics of it.
Sure. At the outset, I'd just like to thank you for inviting me here today. I've had a really good morning session, listening to people looking at this from different perspectives. I clearly come from a completely different perspective, and I probably see the end result of all the bad stuff that happens as a result of pollution. To answer your question, an average human breathes about 1,000 liters of air a day to get oxygen, right? That's the purpose of breathing. I view indoor air pollution as anything that enters the lungs, anything that enters our system beyond what is necessary, which is the oxygen, and which hampers life to a certain extent in whatever way possible. So there is, this visuals about outdoor air pollution. Of course, there's a strong correlation between outdoor and indoor air pollution. If you're in an openly ventilated area, the air outside and the air inside are going to be similar. But most of us nowadays live in artificial environments indoors. We live in air-conditioned environments. The whole idea is to improve productivity. The whole idea is to simulate an environment in which a human being performs to the best of their potential in terms of work. So it has to be comfortable, not too cold, not too warm, right humidity, right lighting, right, we try and create a nice artificial environment. The flip side of that is that we often are not breathing the air which is outside. That can be good, that can be bad. If your air outside is really terrible, you have an excellent opportunity. As someone earlier mentioned this morning, that the air on campus is better than the air off campus. So you have an excellent opportunity to make things better. If the air outside is pristine and you are adding to it as a consequence of the activities that you do within your workspace, then something needs to be done about that. So I think this is kind of air pollution indoors in a nutshell.
Doctor, you said, you talked about right kind of environment that we want to create for ourselves. So which makes me think that you're talking about development, right? So I want to understand, are you saying that the kind of indoor air pollution that we have, that's let's say a byproduct of the kind of development we are having, and we are not, there's something that we are not doing fundamentally right? So in the same breath, if you could help us explain, help us understand, what are the chief differences between, let's say, a developed nation and a developing nation like India in the sense of indoor air pollution? What are the chief characteristics? What is happening to us? What is it that we are not doing right?
Sure. So, as far as the workplace is concerned, my reading of the literature
tells me that the whole problem began somewhere in the 1970s, where there was a huge energy, huge fuel crisis, as a result of which everybody was out there trying to figure out ways to make life more energy efficient. You wanted to use as less fuel as possible. As part of this, buildings were constructed in a design where energy consumption was low. Therefore, you didn't want your air circulated over and over again. You wanted to keep that as low as possible, because the moment you bring in external air, you have to condition it, and that costs energy. The analogy that you can think of is your car air conditioning. If you shut down your windows and you have two options of air conditioning your car, either circulate the same air or bring in outside air. If you circulate the same air, the fuel that your car will use is less than if you bring in outside air. So yes, as a consequence of development and the energy conservation that industries wanted to do, we created these environments in which air was not circulated freely. The WHO, in fact, coined a term in the 90s called the sick building syndrome. The sick building syndrome was an environment in which people went to work and for some reason started having all sorts of funny things. Their eyes would get itchy, they would feel like they have a viral all the time, they would get headaches, they would get sinusitis-like symptoms. And that kind of led to the evolution of the field in terms of trying to figure out ways to make it better. This led to certain standards. So the standards talk about 20 liters per person per hour, which per minute. So 20 liters per person per minute is the amount of air that needs to be circulated. And there are lots of studies which have been done since then. So 20 was the bare minimum, and these bare minimums were defined as what made people happy. So if a person entered a room and felt uncomfortable, that was considered as bad. And from there, they came up with these values. But it's found that if you strive to do better than this 20, if you go from 20 to 40, productivity has shown to be increased significantly. So there is a large study from Harvard which showed that cognitive performance went up by about 8 percentiles, and that converted, they did a rough math on that, and they said that it converts to about $6,500 a year per person, and that came at the cost of about $40 a person. So people assume that these engineering tasks cost a lot of money, but in reality, it's very, very cost efficient. So to answer your second question in terms of the third world versus the first world, when you're talking about indoor air pollution as a broad term, the third world uses a lot of biomass fuels. So a lot of disease that I see in India is a disease called chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD. And in the West, the leading cause of COPD is cigarette smoking, while as in India, the leading cause seems to be biomass fuel exposures. So if you're in a closed, unventilated room and you're cooking with biomass fuels, the particulate matter that you generate as a result of that can cause significant lung problems later in life. This might also spill over to the workplace, because at the end of the day, if a lot of people are burning a lot of things outside, it's the same particulate matter which will find its way through into the workplace. Just as an example, there was a modeling study which was done with these tortoise mosquito coils. Anybody want to guess how much particulate matter does a tortoise, I shouldn't name the brand, but a mosquito coil generates in comparison to a cigarette? So it's about the equivalent of 100 cigarettes. One coil generates 2.5, your PM 2.5, which is somewhere close to 100 cigarettes. It generates formaldehyde, which is the equivalent of about 50 cigarettes or so. So there's a lot of indoor air pollution from things like biomass fuels, from things like burning stuff. Traditionally, we know for a lot of ceremonies, things are burnt, agarbattis are burnt. There are studies which show that individuals who deal with these burning things, like pandits, like, religious people, tend to have far worse lung disease than those who don't. So all of these contribute in a third world country to indoor air pollution.
So, it's absolutely fantastic, the kind of understanding you have given us. But tell me something, doctor. So let's say we are talking about indoor air pollution, right? We can choose to manage our lives in terms of, using or not using a coil. But what about pollution that comes from outside? Let's say if a farmer in Punjab is burning crop residue, and that is kind of getting into our atmosphere and polluting my indoor atmosphere. So how do you look at that? Is that also part of indoor air pollution, or these are two separate things we are talking about?
No, very much. If something from the outdoor air is going to be detrimental to your indoor air, that would qualify as indoor air pollution. Most of us spend an average of about 80 to 90% of our time indoors, either at home or at the workplace. And if you say live in a city where the outdoor air pollution levels are significantly high, you are potentially going to be exposed to that both at work as well as at home. What is the solution? I guess, from a governmental perspective, from a policy perspective, if something could be done about burning crop residues, that would be great. But assuming that nothing can be done about that, we can try and protect ourselves better by, thinking of things like air purifiers in the same way that we kind of accept that the tap water that we get is not necessarily drinkable and something needs to be done about that. May not be an ideal case scenario, but we do the best we can to protect our health in the ways that seem most feasible.
So, Dr. Pinto, what are the chief symptoms that you would say you come across most commonly in, or the chief complaints that people come to you with when it comes to impact of indoor air pollution?
So, since we're talking about the workplace, it's a very common symptom that I see in my patients who come and tell me very often that they feel that their respiratory symptoms are worse when they are at work versus over the weekend or versus when they go on vacation. A common complaint that I hear very often is that I sit below an air conditioning vent, and that makes me very, very uncomfortable. I used to be in a slightly different place earlier, which was far away, and I was okay, but for some reasons I've been moved to this place, which is right below the vent, and that makes my life very difficult. And that can happen for a variety of reasons. Cold air in itself can trigger an asthma attack in people who are vulnerable. It can happen because your air conditioning vents are not necessarily clean. They sometimes, because of the moisture that sometimes sediments on these air conditioning vents, you very often have fungus growing on it. There are certain fungi, such as Aspergillus, for example, which is very commonly found in damp and moist places. And the spores of these fungi can cause a significant irritation to the chest. I also see a lot of patients who have a seasonal variation to their symptoms. So during the periods of the year where there's a lot of smog, where the pollution levels are high and it's slightly, so I come from Mumbai, which is very humid as well. So the humidity causes a lot of the dust particles, a lot of the particulate matter to settle down, and that seems to be a particularly vulnerable time for a lot of patients with respiratory illness. By and large, these are the common symptoms. Of course, sinusitis is another problem which very often reported. People will tell me that the moment they go to the workplace, they start sneezing. It's either the carpet or it's something that's triggering off an allergic reaction. And a lot of these patients are very often on chronic medicines for a long time until they sometimes move jobs, move cities, and things change. So there's definitely, there are two elements to this. One is you are sensitive. The second thing is something in the environment is triggering it off. But we also know that if the dose is large enough, even if you are not sensitive, you can eventually become sensitized. So even a person who doesn't have asthma, who doesn't have a respiratory problem, if he or she is continuously bombarded with a high dose of something that's potentially allergenic, they will eventually start developing symptoms similar to that of asthma or allergic rhinitis.
Okay, so doctor, if you look at our indoor environment, okay, and you look at what are the main causes of indoor air pollution, it's getting triggered by almost everything, from furniture polish to let's say your perfume sprays. Right. Even plants, right? Pollen point of view. So you're basically saying that all of these things are at some level not safe. So my question is, what is safe? What can we do to keep ourselves safe, apart from ventilation, of course?
So there are a lot of initiatives. Again, this comes from my reading. This is technical, so this is not my area of expertise in terms of what can be done engineering-wise, but there seems to be stuff that can be done engineering-wise. So from what I understand is there are a lot of things which generate volatile organic compounds, things which are, fire retardants apparently are used a lot in manufacturing, chairs and things which are there in the workplace, which potentially release a lot of volatile organic compounds. And apparently there are alternatives to these which do not generate that level of indoor air pollution. In terms of sprays, etc., I strongly advise people not to use things like, perfumes and sprays that they use to air fresheners or air purifiers. And the analogy I tend to give my patients is that, you drink water, you don't, mix something in that water to make it more palatable. So if you have to put in a spray to make your air more palatable, then clearly there's a problem with the air to begin with, and you're probably adding more to that rather than taking away from it. So, I generally tend to discourage people from adding anything to the air, as much as possible. That being said, as human beings, we generate carbon dioxide. There's going to be a lot of, as activities, you have carpeting. Whenever that, the carpet is vacuumed, it's going to release stuff. Things like printing ink, which are used for printers, are known to generate stuff into the atmosphere. So certain bare minimum things we can't do away with. What we can, though, is improve ventilation. And that's again a design thing. Improve ventilation, add purification to it in some way if possible. So at source, improving ventilation is eventually going to basically change the turnover of the air in your indoor environment. And that kind of dilutes all these things that we cannot avoid. If for some reason structural changes to ventilation is not possible, you might want to think of the possibility of adding some sort of a purification system to your air. So I think those are the alternatives, and keep a low footprint as far as possible. And I'm sure there are people in the design industry, in the architectural industry, who have more sensible ways of doing things than what is conventionally done.
On this note, let me ask you a question that I'm sure everybody can relate to. So air purifiers, you mentioned them. They're a huge industry now, and the number of people who are opting for air purifiers has significantly gone up. But then there is also a view, a commonly held view, that if I'm going to expose, let's say, my child to an air purifier system in the house, his immunity is likely to be impacted, right? So when he is out in the natural environment, he is likely to be less strong in terms of taking on the pollutants or things like that. Do you think that kind of view holds any value?
So there used to be this concept of a hygiene hypothesis, and basically that's based on observations. So, I mean, it's difficult to randomize people into two groups, one group does this, one group that, and see their outcome over a long time. So we have something called ecological data, which is countrywide data, right? So it's been found that the more developed a country gets, the cleaner it gets, the more asthma, the more allergic conditions are prevalent in those kinds of countries. And from this came up this concept of a hygiene hypothesis, which means that if you keep your kids really clean, they're going to start getting allergic to things that they are not meant to be allergic to. This is a hypothesis. I mean, there's no really strong way to prove or disprove it. And it comes from this concept of parasitic infections as well. So we have, in countries with high parasites, lots of worms in your gut, you tend to have certain substances, like they call eosinophils, a certain type of cell in your body, which the hypothesis is that it somehow protects you from allergic conditions. So we don't see as much, the hypothesis at least is that we don't see as much allergy in India, for example, as is prevalent in the US. Things like peanut allergy, for example, is not as prevalent in India as it is abroad. Now, where would you put that in terms of cost benefit is something that's very debatable. So I don't think there is evidence to suggest that the harm caused by keeping a clean environment is so much that you'd rather accept a dirty environment. In fact, there's solid evidence. If you look at the World Health Organization, they say that 3 million people die every year prematurely just because of pollution. So attributable death, in the sense these people would not have died had they lived in a cleaner environment. So if you look at the net cost benefit, I don't think, maybe it is true that they might develop more allergies, but I don't think it's the prevalence is that solid that you would rather expose your child to air that is unclean than take the chance of a small probability that he might develop an allergic condition in the future.
Okay, so when we read about, let's say, news stories which say 10 out of the 15 most polluted cities in the world are in India, that kind of analysis is taking into account indoor air pollution also?
No, that's predominantly your meters which are put at different cities at different spots. So that's usually the outdoor air they're talking about.
Okay, okay. Doctor, you also talked about, how, there's a link with energy also here, right? Now, I'm trying to understand what happens in a far-flung, rural, poor household, right? Where firewood is being used, for example. And here is a government which is trying to replace a lot of that with clean cooking fuel, LPG cylinders. And there's a large scheme that is, being implemented on that. As a professional, who's dealing with health issues, how do you look at this entire thing? Do you think it is the right approach? Do you think it's making difference at the ground? What more needs to be done, if there is some light that you can throw on these points?
No, so I think it's a fantastic scheme. The scheme of converting everything into LPG is probably the single biggest initiative that the government has taken to try and make the air cleaner. There is no doubt about the link between biomass fuels, that's burning of dung, burning of crop residue, burning of coal, and association with severe lung disease. And switching that to LPG alone can make a huge difference. We also know this from China. So China did that somewhere around the first decade of this century. And the number of deaths that they have from this disease called COPD, which is the second leading cause of death in India as well, has significantly gone down since they switched from biomass fuels to LPG. So I think that's a great move. The other things that can be done in rural India, so my understanding again about architecture is that windows apparently are the most expensive part of building a small little house. For some reason, the structural design of a window makes the house very expensive, and as a result of which most poor hutments, most poor houses have very, very small windows and very little ventilation. If that could be changed in some way, I don't know how, but if ventilation could be improved in houses, I think that would be a step in the right direction as well. Things like burning of kerosene, if that goes away, I mean, that's a huge step forward. So I think, at least as far as COPD, which is one of my areas of interest, as a disease, I think things will start plateauing. You know, right now we've just been on the upswing. Just the mere act of switching over to LPG will cause a plateau in a few years from now, is what I think.
Yeah, and the same goes for, for example, replacing kerosene lamps with LED bulbs. And in fact, there's a large scheme on that also. But anyway, let's talk about monitoring, right? Another very important area when it comes to prevention of these things, so whether it is at the individual level or at the level of an organization like a company. What are the top recommendations that you would have from a monitoring point of view that entities can do?
In terms of improving productivity and...
Exactly.
Right. So I think, we very often focus, and this cuts across all fields in medicine, we very often focus on firefighting. We let problems happen and then firefight. And, the first thing I think, and somebody mentioned it earlier today, is probably do some good solid studies which convince us in India itself that, you can make a huge difference in terms of productivity, etc., when you improve the quality of the air at the workplace. The studies, again, in the US have suggested, so I was reading this poll where they spoke to a lot of managerial level people in different companies and estimated what they thought would be the expenses associated with engineering changes to improve quality of air. And most managers reported those costs as being tenfold of what they actually were. So maybe we need to sit hard and think whether, these things are really that expensive to do, or it's just our inertia which has not let us do that. In terms of cost effectiveness, I think there's a lot of data out there which suggests that the improved productivity will pay for itself. There is data, as far as I know, in call centers. There are call centers which were exposed to different levels of pollution, and the one with the lower level of indoor air pollution had were much more productive than the other center. There are a couple of studies from China which have looked at, I think they did a study in textile mills and looked at the air pollution and productivity, and showed a clear trend that productivity is much more if the air pollution levels are less. So in terms of productivity, in terms of the economic gains, I think it's a no-brainer. You will improve productivity. Now, at what cost will that come? Is that cost worth it, etc.? Studies, at least across the world, seem to suggest it's more than worth it. And I think maybe we should, generate that kind of data in India such that we can convince people to make those changes.
Okay. So when you're talking about breaking an inertia, right? And you also earlier talked about how, so for example, for religious angles, we may be, sometimes tempted to think that, it's okay, Havan, for example. So these things tend to suggest that maybe there is somewhere, it's also a problem of culture or individual habits. Would you throw some light on that?
So, of course, culture plays a strong role in the amount of things we burn. For some reason, culturally, we've always burnt a lot of things. Whether it comes the night before Holi, we tend to burn a lot of fires. Diwali is associated with a lot of crackers, and that's our culture. Now, the challenge is therefore upon us to try and think of more novel ways of doing it. So we were talking earlier, and there's this video somewhere on the net of a Pandit conducting a Havan, but he comes in with his iPad, puts his iPad in the center, and there's a fire which is burning on the iPad, right? Now, that's a stopgap. It may not make everyone happy, but even if it makes 50% happy, you've gone one step slightly forward. And maybe, people eventually will change, the inertia will kind of change, and people will realize that, you know, a symbolic gesture of that flame might be almost as good as the real flame. So it's of course tradition, that's one aspect, but let's not also forget that, you know, biomass fuels, etc., are a lot cheaper. Traditionally have been a lot cheaper, you know, it's been a lot cheaper just to go out into the woods and pick up a few twigs and fire and you know, for no cost build a fire rather than pay someone and try to get it. Now with these LPGs becoming cheap and, you know, being offered to people, hopefully that also will not be an incentive. But I think it's a combination of both tradition as well as the fact that a lot of people are poor and cannot afford things that are probably a little more expensive. And hopefully, you know, with each of us contributing, each of us sensitizing people to the way things are, things will change over time.
Okay. Talking about workplace efficiency, you know, I'm trying to understand how often does it happen that you know, you would have patients complaining of you know, symptoms which you would say are directly linked to indoor air pollution, and they would say that, you know, I'm not able to let's say concentrate on work, or I'm having to take leaves, you know, that kind of thing. So cases where you would be able to establish a direct link between indoor air pollution and the person's ability to perform. How often does that happen?
So it happens reasonably often, especially things like sinusitis. You know, just having a heavy head because your sinuses are clogged is a sensation that's very debilitating. Patients find it very difficult to do anything. You don't have a clear head. It's like when all of us experience a bad cold, right? You have no energy to work, you have no energy to do anything that involves higher faculties. You pretty much want to survive the day and get through the day. So even if you know, like somebody spoke about presenteeism earlier, so it's like you check in, check out, you clock in, clock out, but you really don't feel like doing anything during the course of the day. And I see a lot of patients who come to me with those kinds of symptoms. Most of them will tell me that, you know, when they go on, so the vacation is very often a barometer. They say that when they go on vacation, they're fantastic, you know, they feel full of energy, they're doing all sorts of fun stuff. Now, I mean, of course, that's confounded. I mean, workplaces aren't meant to be fun. Vacations are meant to be fun. So it's not just that, you know, it's the workplace environment that's causing them to suffer. But some of these, you know, it's not uncommon for people to say that when they've changed jobs or, you know, they've moved to a different floor in the building or something has changed their dynamic, things get better. One of the simple tools you know, especially people who feel respiratory symptoms, you get something called a peak flow meter. So this is available for about $400, $500 in any chemist. It's a small little tube which you take in a deep breath and blow really hard. And there's a marker which moves and gives you a number basically. So I often recommend that my patients have a peak flow meter and monitor their peak flows throughout the course of the week, morning, evening, and on weekends. And very often we see a trend that on weekends, when they're at home, the peak flows are slightly better than when they're at the workplace. And that kind of gives you objective evidence to suggest that something at the workplace is triggering it off. So if your employees or somebody, you know, wonders whether the workplace is causing some of their respiratory symptoms, this is kind of a relatively easy way to do, assuming that, you know, everything else remains constant. You're in the same city, so the outdoor air pollution is more or less the same. And yet, if the weekend is different from the weekdays, it suggests that maybe there's something at the workplace that's triggering off symptoms.
Yeah, so, you know, mechanisms like using that flow meter, apart from going on holidays, of course,
right,
is, you know, it's a way of managing the issue. Anyway, Doctor, I think it was very nice talking to you. I think we have broadly covered all the important things. At this point, I would like to, you know, open the discussion for a few questions if we can. So please raise your hands and try and identify yourself. So let's begin with the person on the left.
I wanted to come back to the subject of...
so if you can identify yourself.
My name is Sanjeev Sethi. I work for Adobe. Wanted to come back to the subject for where you said the immunity in children may go down if you are constantly under air purifier controlled environments. And I have a rationale to it, and I wanted the doctor to comment whether that may be right or wrong. My take is that the air we are breathing today is equal to X number of cigarettes. There's several kind of... And if I stop smoking, does my immunity go down? And if it doesn't, then it should be seen in the same way in awareness practices that if your child stops smoking now, is it good or bad for his or her health? Is that connotation correct or is it wrong?
So I don't know the technical aspects of it, but that's a very fresh perspective. That's something worth thinking about, no doubt. So yeah.
No, I completely am on your side. I don't believe that your immunity goes down. But this is where the idea comes from. This whole hygiene hypothesis, which has been touted as why third world countries seem to have less allergies.
Yeah, but that's also subject to a lot of marketing practices. Yeah,
I totally agree.
The lacto allergies and peanut allergies are by a function of huge diagnostic centers which were there. They could find that, and then some almond guy wanted to sell almonds, so he introduced peanut allergies and stuff like that. So
no, I'm completely on your side. In fact, to me it seems irrational because you're kind of purifying the air to a level that your air matched that in, say, Sweden or somewhere else, and everybody in Sweden would be falling sick by that rationale.
Yeah, exactly.
But they're clearly healthier than us, right? So, I totally agree with you.
Thank you.
Hello, Doctor. My name is Mohit, and I run a market research firm, and I help companies, clean tech companies entering India. I have a question regarding health of children, especially with a perspective that if we relocate from Delhi NCR, my child is now almost 4. She has inhaled a lot of air in Delhi. When we move out of Delhi, whatever damage that might have been done, do you think is it reversible, the damage that is being done to me and everyone, if we relocate to somewhere cleaner place, is it reversible?
So again, very difficult question to answer specifically like this, but I'll give you the analogy of cigarettes since someone brought it up, right? So a person who gives up smoking, so when you smoke, you lose a certain, there's a quantum of lung function that you lose every year as a result of smoking. When you stop smoking, that quantum starts resembling that of a normal non-smoking individual, and over time what you've lost doesn't come back, but your slope of decline starts goes absolutely parallel to that of a person who has never smoked. So if you smoke, you lose about, say, 50 ml of your lung function every year. A person who doesn't smoke loses about 25. If you stop smoking, after about 5 years or so, you will also lose about 25 every year, like a person who has never smoked. But that 50 which you've lost all the earlier years sometimes doesn't come back. It very often doesn't come back. Now, whether that same analogy holds true for pollution, I'm not really sure. But I don't think you should view it as something that's depressing in the sense that, something bad has happened in my life and, this is, somehow cooked for life. It's not like that. Of course, improving, and that's true for most health behaviors, right? So you've been fat all your life, but you decide to exercise, those benefits of the exercise you're going to get. The consequences of being fat all your life you might face, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't aspire to something better.
So I think that's a very positive message for all the smokers, at least. Everybody who thought that giving up may not undo the damage done already. Here is a message to take home. In a few years maybe you'll be back to an absolutely healthy state. Anyway, any other questions? Yeah, please.
Doctor, you have touched on the Indian culture, Indian festival, like Diwali, crackle, and then Pandit celebrating and doing havan, burning of agarbatti, etc., etc. This is a very important issue which you have hit, and it has a very cultural effect also. It will cascading effect across the country among the Hindu community. Now, lakhs of bodies are burnt in the funeral, which for one body 18 months converted to kgs used. Can the government come with the solution that this habit is to be totally stopped? Or is there any other alternative to this thing which will be acceptable to the community across the country?
I think that that question transcends into the domain of cultural, cultural religious, aspects of, and he may not, as a doctor, as a professional doctor, may not have the expertise to answer it properly, But would you like to venture into it, doctor?
Yeah, I usually tend to see patients before that stage, but. But again, to the best of my understanding, there are electric crematoriums which are there now, which don't burn logs of wood. So I'm assuming that does a little less damage than burning logs of wood would. So I think there's already a step forward. Whether you embrace that step at what velocity, whether at which it is embraced, depends on how the culture evolves over time.
Okay, do we have any more questions?
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Reema Garg and I head the HR for SMC Global Securities. I have a question that when we talk about indoor pollution, so air purifier or planting indoor plants, and what is the ratio? How many plants is equivalent to maybe one air purifier, or which is better?
So again, to the best of my understanding, plants will enrich the oxygen in the air to a certain extent. But I don't really, again, correct me if somebody knows better, I don't really think plants absorb the pollution that's already there. The particulate matter that's already there is not necessarily going to be absorbed by a plant. So a plant might enrich the oxygen in your air, but if you have a lot of other stuff floating in your air which needs to be filtered, I don't think plants are able to do that.
Yeah, you wanted to ask something?
I want to ask about the bacterial level pollution in the air, especially in the hospitals or such environment. And are these pollution are filtered by any air purifier or not?
So I think a lot of air purifiers now have HME filters. So HME filters purify things up to very small micron levels, and I think a lot of the bacteria are filtered by them. In fact, the problem with that kind of a system is that the room needs to be airtight. If you're not continuously opening and closing the room, there will be new bacteria that enter in. So for example, in a doctor's office, I see a lot of patients with TB, for example, and I decide to put in an air purifier in my room, it will not necessarily work, because every time the person opens the door and comes out, there's going to be a fresh blast of air which comes in. So if you're in a relatively contained environment and the air purifier is kept on for whatever the half an hour, 1 hour that it's recommended, it does a good job of purifying bacteria as well. Not all viruses from what I understand, but bacteria as well. The second question was about bacterial transmissions in closed areas. Yeah, I mean, so air pollution has been associated with pneumonias, has been associated with flu spreading very easily from worker to worker. So right now in Mumbai, there is almost an epidemic of swine flu that we are seeing over the past 2-3 weeks. And closed spaces, things which are not adequately ventilated are more likely to spread airborne diseases for sure.
What is the best way to protect them?
So best way is washing your hands frequently, keeping surfaces as clean as possible. Use the traditional namaste rather than shaking hands. I think it's a great thing. That's a fantastic example of where culture works to our advantage. I think that's very good. And I think that's the two main things that one can do to protect yourself. And take the flu shot. If your immunity is low for some reason, you have diabetes, you have some other diseases, you should take the flu shot every year.
Okay, we have a gentleman standing there. Yeah, please go ahead.
Doctor, I would ask you about hospitals. It's a regulatory requirement to have laminar airflow and HEPA filters in operation theaters. With the levels of air pollution in North India, don't you think it should be regulatory requirement for critical care or high dependency units as well? I mean, these are patients with surgical wounds or medical conditions, and we keep talking about infection control and faster patient turnarounds. What are your thoughts on that?
So again, to the best of my understanding, I don't think increased particulate matter necessarily converts into an increased bacterial load or a viral load. So I mean, to the best of my knowledge,
it is a toxin. It is a toxin, and if ozone and PM 2.5 combined can lead to mortality because of what it's doing inside your lung, I mean, this is an outdoor kind of wound on your body.
Sure.
That's open to air.
No, I mean, there's no reason for me to disagree with you. I mean, if you're making the air cleaner, of course, there's a strong argument to be made in favor of it. I kind of agree with you, especially in patients who are immunocompromised in an ICU, their immunity is low. I mean, we should strive to give them the best air possible.
Yeah, because of paucity of time, we'll have to wrap it up, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Doctor. Thanks a lot for all that technical understanding that you've given us and all the key takeaways that we have. And thanks, audience, for being so patient. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, gentlemen. Certainly made for a very lively chat. A lot of helpful tips there that we can include on an immediate basis in our everyday life. And ladies and gentlemen, that essentially made for a wonderful note upon which to close the ETRealty Workspace Efficiency Summit. But, I'd like to re-acknowledge our partners in this effort, without whose support platforms like this simply do not exist. So that, of course, includes our presenting partner, Candor TechSpace, and our clean air partner, Honeywell. But I'd especially like to thank all of you for being such a high-energy, incredibly well-informed audience, and I ask that you please join us for lunch. Have a lovely afternoon. Thank you.